I've. So, take it away, Lauren.
All right, we are live. Welcome to this week's Heathen Talk. I am Lauren, otherwise known as That's Not Nice. With me always is my co-host Josh, an anarcho-heathen, and we have two lovely guest hosts with us this week.
I guess I'll take it.
Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, my name's Kevin. You probably know me better as Aleglad, or God, I hate that guy.
That's what we all know you as.
Well, I know you as that annoying dude who won't shut up. So
hey, you know what? It's not my fault. You're doing it wrong.
Hey! Now you're not the boss of me.
Isn't that the end of the show?
It applies everywhere.
All right, so this week we are talking about noob issues, just the questions they face, the hurdles they face, and the questions they ask us all the time. And holy crap, somebody else talk, I gotta go close a blind.
Well, really, I mean, I think one of the things that you hear in heathenry is that how heathenry is hostile to new people, and you have to come in with this encyclopedic knowledge of lore before you can even, peek your head up in the heathen community.
You know, that's partly true and partly not. The main difference that I've found is it's not a matter of what you know, it's a matter of how you walk into a room. You know, for example, this is something we see on the sub all the time. Somebody comes in, they have a great deal of excitement, they're ready to go, and then they just say the dumbest thing possible.
No, let me correct you on that, Kevin. They don't necessarily always say the dumbest thing. They say ignorant things, which is much more forgivable than dumb. And I think that's important.
That may actually be fair.
Now, I have been new once, though granted, when I was new in heathenry, we didn't have Reddit and Facebook, so everything dumb I said were on small closed mailing lists that probably don't exist anymore. But, you know, it's okay. I just want to put that out there. It is okay to say ignorant things when you're new, so long as you're willing to learn and realize, and okay with somebody saying that's not correct.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I find is the most important thing, is if you say something absolutely foolish and you get corrected for it, the response is not, oh, I'm mad, I'm going to throw a fit and then double down on it. You should stop and listen and go, okay, I obviously said something foolish. Maybe I ought to listen to this.
Well, see, part of the problem is this goes into something that I believe we're going to cover a little bit later on in this show, at least in part, is they're not coming into it with the mindset that a lot of people that have been into it for a while have, and not the mindset that people that have been in our specific forums are coming into it as. When you come into places like the subreddit, oftentimes they're very reputation-based. People who have been posting there for a while have done their best to prove that they know what they're talking about. They have fought and clawed and gained a reputation with the people listening. But the people who come there for the first time don't necessarily understand that. So they are coming at it from the attitude of everybody is just here as a free-for-all and nobody knows anybody, so their opinions and words are just as valid as anybody else's.
Well, and I think that comes from the fact that when you first fall into heathenry, like I did, I just kind of fell into it, you end up with the idea that everyone is new at it because you're new at it, and there's really only about 15,000 of us worldwide. So you come in thinking, I know all the things there are to know because I read this book. Everybody should listen to me as an equal.
And, you know, I don't think that there's anybody in this group that can say they didn't spend some time like that, Kevin.
What? You know, it's been so long, I can say I honestly don't remember those days. That may also be one too many punches to the head, but, that's another story.
Well, I think it could be argued that that's one of the points here is that has been made by other people to us in the past, is that we need to kind of strive to remember those days.
Well, and remembering those days keeps us honest and humble with ourselves. I mean, I honestly don't think that some of the leadership in some of the national orgs remembers that they were ever the new guy. And that's because they've got this huge reputation and they've forgotten where they come from.
Some of the leaders, I knew some of the leadership in some of the national orgs when they absolutely were the new guy. So I can remember some of those people way back because I've been around a long time. But, it's the thing is that people with it, we have that mentality. I think that this religion does tend to draw in some rather hard-headed people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the default nature is a thick skin, a quick mouth, and an attitude problem, the size of Brooklyn.
Well, I think that pretty much sums up most of the longtime heathens, but not necessarily the newbie heathens that we're talking about, and that's part of what we're getting at, is that we have a tendency to approach them as though they should already know that this is our culture.
We do, and I've noticed that a lot of new heathens that come into the sub, they come in and they say silly things, and sometimes, those of us who've been doing this for many years jump down their throats over it, and it doesn't help them any. Not most of them. Some of them learn from taking that lump and move on pretty quick, but there are quite a few who just figure we're assholes and move on.
Well, they're not entirely wrong.
That's true.
Well, but that is the kind of culture that's been built up. But at the same time, I don't necessarily know that that culture is really that heathen. I mean, it is, but at the same time, I sometimes question if that's more residual from the kind of biker gang origins of the modern Austrian movement in the 70s than it is actual, heathen belief and values.
I don't think it has much to do with the biker culture of the 70s heathen movements, but I do think that it's very much based on the fact that we're very small and there's a lot of misinformation out there, and so we get very protective over our sources and over our online groups because we don't want those negative influences in there, so we try to chase them off before they even get a foothold.
Right. I think that's part of it, and I think part of it has just been an organic development of culture over time. Part of it might be, as Lauren was pointing out, that some of our starting influences are definitely from a rougher, tougher subculture before it ever really turned into heathenry, and some of it has been, as you were pointing out, Josh, that we do get protective over very hard-gained knowledge, very hard-won knowledge. And it all kind of comes together and turns into this sort of a, sit down and shut up and listen, noob, and maybe you'll fucking learn something type of attitude.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually one of the things. And I freely admit I can be one of the guiltiest parties on this one. It's talking with Forvern on multiple occasions. This is something that is extremely important to a lot of us. So when we see people saying things or doing things, it's not that there's not an appreciation for the fact that they just don't know any better. It's gotten to a point where you're so removed from it that we tend to forget it can't be, and at the moment is extremely important to them as well. We don't necessarily need to bring out the claws and fangs, pitchforks and torches every time. And that's actually something that becomes very, very hard to remember when, especially when you're dealing with things online, and it's hard to tell between someone who's ignorant and someone who's trolling. And we get enough of both of that.
Well, to be fair, I generally like to, granted I'm not one of the 4 Modleys, but I generally try to give someone the benefit of the doubt until they prove otherwise, based on kind of my own understanding of hospitality, even in those kind of online venues, mostly just because I don't want to run off quality people who are then going to turn around. We are a reputation-based religion, for that matter. And there are places on the internet that have these huge reputations of being, well, don't go there because they're mean to everybody. And
That's a true Lord.
Or, inversely, there are places on the internet that, oh man, don't deal with them. They are a giant pit of stupid.
Tumblr.
Hey, now, I was actually thinking in terms of some Facebook groups, but whatever.
Oh, well, there's
potato.
I mean, come on. And the truth is if you go back and you kind of look at the history of our Reddit group, and you go back about 3 years and start looking into the archives, holy cow. I mean, and I'm not saying that the people who were in charge back at that time weren't doing the best they could, but for the medium, there was a lot of that new age stuff that, frankly, we've put an active effort into driving out.
And rightly so, I think. I mean, we've really worked hard, not just on the subreddit before I became a mod, but in a lot of Facebook groups, and also True Lore is a prime example of this. There has been a concerted effort to take what I believe was coined newage sewage and drive it away, because that isn't what heathenry has, and it's certainly not what heathenry is.
Sorry about that. I got distracted by something there. I was actually listening.
Sorry, I was looking at a chat message myself. So.
Yeah, it was partly that. You'll have to excuse me. I literally walked in the door and was logging into this podcast before I even got my boots off from work. It was just one of those types of days. But by giving that explanation for being distracted, I completely forgot what I was going to say. So I'll catch up in about 30 seconds, I swear.
I'm supposed to let everybody know that Marcel is in the chat room right now.
Hi, Marcel.
I would like to take a moment then to give a little notice of appreciation to our hairless beach monkey. You got to give the guy credit, and I mean this very sincerely. He's comical, and we actually genuinely need that from time to time. But for where it seemed like he was going to start, he's come a heck of a long way. Also, Marcel, you still don't get to see my face.
Well, I was just talking with Josh yesterday about, or maybe it was earlier today, about the fact that occasionally, Marcel's very, very quick to pick up with a lot of our new posters and try to give them both a decent welcome and good answers to his questions to the best of his extent and the best of his knowledge. And even occasionally he pops off with some ridiculously insightful things to say to those of us that have been doing it for years. Yeah, that was earlier today we were talking about that, where he just pops off with some ridiculously insightful thing, and all you can think of is out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I like best. And this is sort of something that's true for a lot of noobs, is that even if you've been doing this 20 plus years,
you miss things.
You miss things, and then sometimes they will say something that you have to stop and look at and go, Well, son of a gun. How? Not only how did I miss it, but 2 points for Gryffindor because
Nerd.
yeah, you know what? I promised my wife I would get a Harry Potter reference in. So
Well,
there
have you told
go.
her? Have you told her yet that we voted you into House Slytherin?
Yeah, and she completely agreed. I'm going to have to acquiesce on that one. I personally thought Hufflepuff would be a little better because I'm mostly Huff and Puff, but
Yeah, but we all know that's Josh.
Hey, come on.
I really think though that there's also the thing where some of us have been in this a long time, may not be as caught up on our reading as we should be, and kind of are still entrenched in outdated ideas.
okay, actually,
That's absolutely true. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Kevin, but you're going to like my interruption anyway.
okay.
Before we move on too far from our stroking of Marcel's ego, I would like to propose a toast to Marcel. I know that Kevin has a shot sitting by that's rather similar to mine. And,
Well, it's at least the contents are the same. Mine looks like a shotgun shell.
well, yeah, but
You
if
know,
the content.
I don't have appropriate glasses because I suck.
No, you don't have appropriate glasses because I'm lazy and I keep forgetting to send them to you. But anyways, for the other two, grab whatever you happen to have close to you. I'd like to raise a toast to Marcel, our favorite newbie.
We love you, Marcel. Really.
Marcel.
To Marcel.
And Marcel, I just want to say that you are really good for my ego.
So for any of you listening and or watching at home that are curious about what just happened, Kevin and I, because we are both filthy Swedes, are drinking akavit. I don't know exactly what Kevin has in his shot glass, but I know mine is a cask strength that I get from Old Ballard Liquor Company in Ballard in Seattle, Washington. And anybody
They're not giving us money.
And I would like to point out, when it goes down wrong, oh wow.
I continue to hold this bottle up because no, they are not giving us money. However, the single owner and proprietor and distiller there is one of the most wonderful women that I've ever met, and she definitely distills the best product that I've ever had. Now, moving on.
You'll have to have some for me when I come up to the Cascadia moot.
Of course I will. I will have some for a few people, not many, because the stuff's, not super expensive, but, I can't exactly go buying a case of it.
Well, I can't have much, so there you go. I'm easy.
Yeah, well.
So I just want to point out real
that
quick.
will last a while too.
Just want to point out real quick. We're at 16 viewers, which is twice the number of viewers we've ever had before. So.
Woo!
And that's live viewers. Didn't we have like triple-digit downloads for last week?
Our first episode had 190, and this last episode had 174.
Oh, we're losing popularity. Quick, somebody do something.
I wasn't as proactive in getting the show out on social media because I had a family emergency, got called out of town, and was doing everything this week on my cell phone, which is not the most productive thing when you can't see very well.
And I'll go ahead and admit it. I'm just not as good as she is at this stuff, so.
Well, you all know my opinion on that. As far as I'm concerned, all that computer stuff is the magic spells that I don't know.
So, I want to kind of go to kind of a springboard off of this in talking about some of the things that us old bees can get kind of entrenched into. I want to talk about probably the thing that I see the most arguments about online, not so much in person because it just never comes up, the 9 noble virtues.
Oh, God.
So, before we get too far into this, I want to point out that, in a lot of heathen circles, the 9 noble virtues get nothing but hate. We dump on them all the time because they are a very modern invention. They're, in all honesty, poor distillation of what there is in the lore. But they do have value. And discounting that value for new heathens, where it gives them a bullet point to look at and say, okay, this is heathen-ish. That's important, and we can't totally throw them away because of that.
That, sir, is a matter of opinion. And I do believe it is a wrong opinion.
Okay, so I
And
fall
here I thought I was going to be challenged to justify that.
I fall somewhere in the middle. I can see the virtue of having an elevator speech when it comes to explaining heathenry to someone outside of heathenry. However, I don't think that the 9 noble virtues are an accurate reflection of heathenry. And as I've thought a lot more about this week, because I've been in the car for so long, gives you a lot of time to think.
Somebody's making noise.
Yeah, don't worry about it. That's my wife's cell phone. She's just out of the room.
I personally think that the 9 noble virtues have done a disservice because of this whole self-reliance, industriousness, look at me, look how big and bad I am, and I don't need nobody, that's contradictory to the community mindset that I feel is really essential heathenry.
Well,
I'm actually with Lauren on this one. For the most part, it is a leftover construct of the Odinic rite from the 70s, and it's very much part of, I guess, what you could call the extreme individualism, but kind of that era. It actually teaches certain ideas that say, I am a fortified city unto myself. Piss off.
That's something I wholeheartedly agree with. In fact, I was just bringing up a list of them so I could talk more specifically on the reasons that I think they're a problem. And I think the one that you're really getting at right there, Kevin, is if we're going for the Odinic rite variant, the first one is number 7 on the list, which is self-reliance. And the important thing to think about here when it comes to that is not so much what self-reliance meant to the person who originally penned the 9 noble virtues, but what self-reliance means to the average person growing up in Western culture. And that often means to that person, sorry, we'll cut the dead air out in post. It often means to the person that's listening to it from Western culture that you don't need other people's help, and that you need to be self-contained in all matters and be just capable in all matters. And that's really not just not a heathen virtue, but it's an anti-heathen virtue.
Well, so we've had conversations about individualism before, and actually Lettuce brought up that that's usurped Lettuce for Reddit users. He brought up that they are very much a falsely individualistic view of what heathenry is. And heathens can't be individuals. The smallest unit for a heathen is the tribe. It's the group, and it's your family, your community. And so when you have a virtue that says self-reliance, it is very misleading, and it tends to lead to people who just want to take and go and live off in the woods all by themselves, and that just doesn't work.
Well, right. And we're looking at it from a matter of what, 40 years later, when they came up with these concepts. One, they're looking at the Icelandic sagas as a thing to replicate rather than sometimes as a story of what not to do. But they also had absolutely no concept, no way of even imagining what we would call prepper culture today, which is based on that extreme individualism and that rejection of society for everything except you, your children, your spouse, and maybe brothers and sisters, if there's room for them, possibly.
And I think that that's a good point. Also, that is also one of those things where I feel we very much imparted Americanism onto that.
Thank you. I was just going to say the same thing.
We're really all spending too much time together now.
Far too much.
The idea that, you think like the Western culture going out into the land and cowboys and all that, and it's just not a feasible way to live, and it's really not a feasible tribal system. And for me, as someone who doesn't have that extreme amount of self-reliance, I can't take myself to the grocery store because they, once again, thanks Obama, they took my driver's license because I can't see. There has to be, I that's something I've always really struggled with, especially back in heathenry 10 years ago, when that was the 9 Noble Virtues were still fairly much, I would say they were much more widely accepted. You saw them published a lot more. It makes it, like I said, I think that that's such an Americanism that we've tried to put on a culture that is, to a great degree, kind of very counter to what really, the American individual rugged spirit, which is fine, but just not my belief.
Right. And, I believe this isn't the first time even in this podcast series that we touched upon the concept of American exceptionalism and the American dominance that kind of comes into this culture, the heathen culture that's been developing over the last 40 or 50 years or so. And this is some of the reason I think that we do often get a lot of flack from non-American heathens.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually fair because I keep at least some conversations running with members of the heathen community in Sweden, and outside of Reddit, our Reddit users who are Scandinavian, and one of the things that they regularly look at is just bizarre. At least this has been my experience with the ones that I've talked to. That the kind of the rejection of doing it together is just, it's so strange to them.
And that is a different cultural mindset that we get, and it's something that we, I think, as Americans have to work harder to a degree to embrace than people who were Sweden or Iceland or, I'm sorry about that, Ginger has a squeaky toy. Let me take that away from her.
You have a dog named Ginger too.
Well, and this is, we're getting dog people. Oh, Miss Ginger, thank you. You're not tall enough to get on the couch, so. But I just really think that that's something that we have to kind of work harder to shed that mindset, along with a Christian mindset and a lot of other kind of baggage that I'm going to say this, almost everybody that comes into heathenry is going to have some of it. And I had it, I know that Josh has talked about, having it too, and I'm sure you other two have too.
Everybody does.
So there's something I want to kind of jump back a little bit here, and I want to touch on what exactly self-reliance is in the context of this conversation, so that people can get a grasp of how the modern idea of self-reliance doesn't necessarily line up with the heathen idea of self-reliance.
Right.
And so when we break this down and we talk about self-reliance, we're not talking about the fact that you may need to call someone to help you change a tire, or you may have a disability and therefore you need help in your daily life. For heathen, self-reliance is again, the smallest unit is your family, and so being self-reliant is being part of that and providing for that family unit.
Yeah, and see, and that's actually kind of one of those things that I think it's in a historic context, and that's really where I start with just about everything. Is that a concept of kin stability, and that if the clan itself can build what it needs, or harvest what it needs, grow what it needs, slaughter what it needs, hunt what it needs, that's still not going to be enough. You have to be able to trade with others. I mean, you would have to have a veritable village, all related to each other, just for the clan to do what it needs to do to be self-reliant or independent.
Well, I think that's a kind of the point that this really comes down to, is and kind of goes back into the why of the fact that the Nine Noble Virtues are so misleading, especially for new heathens, or for, as Lauren had brought up, the possibility of using it as an elevator speech, is that they don't really make sense until you've already been doing it for a while and can understand them, and by that point they have no use anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I found about it, and I'll admit, when I started, the Nine Noble Virtues were, everybody could recite them from memory without question, and one of the ladies that I met early on, who has a very good grasp of certain elements that I found very attractive to listen to her on, is also a disabled woman who, by herself, cannot get by. Life dealt a really raw deal, and it's hard. It was a lesson that I learned from her that is really, really, really hard to take a moral set like the Nine Noble Virtues seriously when they're promoting what you could call like a tin Viking idea. You know, horned helmet, magic spear. I'm sure Bugs Bunny's running around somewhere. That kind of over-the-top Viking idea. And they would have never allowed her to survive past infancy. So if you're looking at these ideas of how to be a macho Viking, and I think that that's really what the Nine Noble Virtues come down to more often than not, it becomes very hard to take it seriously when you know it doesn't apply to you.
Right.
Let me tell you what, it's the as I have heard it called Viking true or brosa true, or I recently learned dude brosa true. That, I mean, you were talking about something that will just get me irritated super fast. Is the trying to impose this, once again, American machismo onto heathenry that didn't belong, and these Victorian, I mean, really, to a great degree, it's these kind of Victorian ethics onto heathenry from, the scholarship at the time, which projected their own sexual frustrations and whatnot onto heathen mythology.
Yeah, no, and that's actually one of the things that we have to be really careful when making recommendations to sources. And for as much as I will pound on Culture of the Teutons for a great deal of number of things, you also have to remember that Grönbeck was writing in the 19th century, and while his depictions and his interpretations are very, very good, even the best material from that time has to be looked at with some skepticism of, okay, where are you looking at this? Because there are times, as you go through Culture of the Teutons, he is guilty of the noble savage idea. And this idea of the noble savage is something that I think gets applied to heathenry just about everywhere. We've had a few jokes about a couple of those videos that have been posted over on Ask a Heathen, with pec flexes. Seriously, this could not be any more into that same noble savage behavior. It just, is a different interpretation of it. It doesn't have a cowboy hat.
I should probably
try that one more time. I didn't quite catch it.
Okay. Where did you lose me?
You said something cowboy hat.
Oh, okay. The pec flex is the noble savage in a different interpretation.
Oh.
It doesn't have the cowboy hat that we're familiar with, but oh my God, was it painfully Swedish too.
Right. Okay. It's another one of those things where you get that, and the dude had solid A cups. You got to give him that. They were solid A cups. And he was very earnest, but flexing with every word is just a little much.
And I'm not even sure he knew he was doing it at that point.
You know what though? I gotta give him credit. If I had pecs like that, you know what? I'd probably show them off too.
At that point, I wouldn't even own shirts.
No.
I lift. So do you even lift, bro?
I do.
Yeah.
Well,
My perk is out of my
time.
chair to go get a beer, and then I lift the beer up and pour it over, and it goes into a glass.
As I was known to say recently, I have all the respect in the world for fat guys because they lift every time they move.
Yes, we do.
See, I have gotten into physical fitness partially because of heathenry, but once again, it's not that whole self-reliance mindset of, oh, well, I have to be able to lift a car to be heathen, which I have heard people say, and I'm just absolutely baffled by it. I think I have to laugh sometimes, otherwise I'll cry at some of the stupid.
Well, I'm always really confused by that attitude because the same people that are throwing that out there are also usually the lore thumpers. And they apparently missed a couple of verses in the Havamal they hold so dear about that everyone has a use, everyone has utility in some way or the other. The lame can ride a horse, for example.
I quote that all the time. That's I'm the lore thumper on that one, and I'll totally own up to that. But dang it, I'm blind. I have to do something to get back at the lore thumpers.
Well,
I think I should have been put out to be exposed and die.
This brings up actually a really valid point. You see a lot of noobs who come into it and they read the Havamal or they read the sagas and the Eddas. I had a friend who he was convinced that you had to mix New Age in with heathenry because the only source was Snorri, and thus it was all tainted with Christianity. And he was shocked when I told him that that's not our only source. We have much better sources now.
Well, and we've had really good material. The difference that I see today than like 20 years ago, it's not even the internet. It's honestly, we've had it and we've lost it. But these the major bookstore chains, there was a period of time where you could actually go to the history section, and if you were looking for Viking Age material, because let's be honest, it was almost always classified as that, you would have 2, 3, 4 shelves of really, really good academic stuff. And, the modern situation for bookstores being terrible, you don't have it anymore, but so much of that material is not available online anymore. If you're lucky, you can find somebody who has a digital copy of The Road to Hell, but good luck finding anything else of Ellis Davidson's. in a PDF format, or some of Jesse Byock's early material. It's we've kind of lost some of this, and it almost makes it impossible to take that good material, that analysis of 100 years of archaeology, and teach anybody with it, because it's not in print anymore.
I will say this, that as someone who, kind of struggles with print books, there really are a lot more things out there on PDF. We just lack people, I would say, other than maybe a very few people who are cultivating these public domain sources, like The Road to Hell, or that kind of stuff. I think that's an issue. But growing up in Arkansas, we didn't have any of that. I can honestly say it took a while back, 10, 15 years ago, for me to find a copy of the Eddas locally.
Well,
so Amazon has been Amazon and that kind of stuff has just been wonderful for me to have all of a sudden, any book that's in print I can think of, to be able to get a hold of it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just some of the ones that I found there have been not ones I expected. I found a copy of, and I'm not just talking about the sagas and the Eddas, the high lore, so to speak. I'm talking about even academic texts like Culture of the Teutons. It's available there. It cost me like $10, and that's not a lot of money to pay for a really amazing book.
Yeah. And it's both volumes for $10. It's great.
Yes.
Even things like A Piece of Horse Liver, which was out of print for a very long time, is now back in print and available on Amazon.
Yeah, and the fact that that Piece of Horse Liver is back in print is a fantastic thing. That's actually one of those books that I myself have yet to acquire, because I just have, honestly, I've been spending my money on booze and firearms and not books. So a little bit of brochure there myself, I think, but resources like Amazon actually have been really good, because I've even seen publications that go back to the 1800s for Scandinavian folktales come back into print with the advent of print on demand. And that's really the thing that we are going to benefit most from. And I think every noob is going to benefit from, because when you start to see all of these texts available, it almost starts to become, you no longer need a recommended reading list, because once you get a couple of good texts, Amazon is going to tell you what to buy next.
And that one of the things that I want to say here, the other really good thing about this print on demand and all this has been that you're able to get books in a lot more formats to people. Something that I work on, and when I have free time, is converting the public domain stuff into screen reader available formats, so that people like me who use screen readers or use basically voice synthesis for books, have those public domain things, and they're not just scans of PDFs.
No, and that's actually something that would be valuable to a lot of people. I mean, even if you just were to have a way in which that you could have it play in the background while you're doing other things at home. Some of the things that we have a technological advantage of today that honestly we didn't have 20 years ago, really, I think for newcomers, this is a fantastic time. There's so much more research just generally available that it becomes almost impossible to not find good material.
Right, and Lauren,
Yes.
I wanted to point out for people, in your situation, things are getting even better extremely rapidly depending on what platform you use. I know, for example, the newest software on the newer Kindles can automatically convert PDFs into their own files that have things like the ability to increase the size of the text to something you can actually read.
That only works if it's not a scan PDF, like where they've just taken the book and scan it.
Okay,
I
wasn't
actually have to use special software. But I actually wrote today, oddly enough, a tutorial on how to do this if you're using an iOS. That's what I use because that's what most people with print disabilities use.
I'm so sorry.
I love my iPhone. But I will put in the show notes a link to that tutorial I wrote today about basically how to do that. So you can, because there are people, that's one of the things that I always had issues with heathenry is that with that bar of entry and with that learning, there were so few ways for someone who has a print disability to really get into heathenry, other than be lucky enough to live near other heathens.
Right. Well, and even on that, if you're dealing with the right OCR software, the scan of a page, it's just an image. If you run that through the right software, it'll pick up the text and convert it into a workable format.
Yeah, with about 90% accuracy. I worked in disability services,
right?
I used to do that before I started going blind.
Yeah. Well, 90% still a lot better than what it used to be.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been such a the technology has grown, and just I think back at the books that were available to the very first generation of new Asatruar and heathens versus what's available to us now. They might be able to get a copy of the Eddas. Probably not a great translation of it, and if they were lucky enough to live near a university that allowed non-students to use their library, they could run copies of some stuff, but that was it.
Oh right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the most beautiful thing about the access that we have today is that it allows us to transition into our next topic.
Nice segue.
Look at this. Look at me segueing. So the next topic being that with the advent of having so much more research available to us, so much accounts that we didn't have access to before, or scholarly works that we didn't have access to before, this allows us to focus more on understanding the culture that this religion ultimately came from, and to excise from that culture, or excise from the modern culture, the Christian baggage that we carry with us.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that I'm going to quote you here, Thorin. I was raised Christian, and so were you. This is something that most of us are going to have to remember the rest of our lives, because whether we like it or not, it is going to be with us in some way, and it's going to be with our children, because we cannot be free of it. Hopefully they will have a lesser impact, but they won't be free of it. And even if they were to only live with us, which would be psychologically unhealthy beyond belief, the dominant Western overculture is going to automatically teach them certain Christian values that it's going to be generations upon generations before that statement isn't true to at least 90%.
Well, honestly, I mean, as long as Christianity remains the dominant religion of the overculture, and even for a long time beyond that, we're going to see that, simply because, for all that, here in America, a lot of us are fond of pointing out that we are not a Christian nation, and, our founding documents reflect that. But even besides that, you cannot argue that a good portion of our culture and the moral foundation of the overculture are definitely informed by Christianity. You just cannot get past that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I don't bring up terribly often, but my father was a Methodist minister before I was born. I received a fantastic education in Christian theology, just because my father already knew it. To this day, I have not been able to shake certain Methodist elements. That's what I was raised. And there's actually a certain point where you have to understand that sometimes you can unpack your baggage, and then sometimes you just you just have to learn how to live with it. If you look at some of the public ritual stuff that I have done, you'll see that it suffers very much from that Methodist upbringing of you go from point A to point B to point C very quickly, and everything has a time, because if you went to an 11 o'clock service, you knew you were out, you knew you were out by noon, so you could be home by 12:30 for Sunday football. Period.
Or no.
End of discussion.
Let's be honest. You go to the 11 o'clock service, you're done at 12, so that the Methodists can eat, so that there's not a line when the Baptists show up at 12:30.
Also true.
Well, I was raised evangelical, and I have some of the same issues. Not to mention, I also have had a wandering into British traditional witchcraft. So I actually attended Wolstenstein Theological Seminary for a year, which is a Wiccan seminary. So I have baggage from both of those, and I know that, but I think and I'm probably going to get called out for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The more you mature into a faith, the less that baggage deeply impacts you. You're able to more quickly say, "Oh man, that's not cool. That's just, you're able to just at least see it for what it is when it happens."
Well, it goes back to the common phrase that we busted out more than once on the sub, and I know I busted out in real life quite a bit too, is there's no right way to heathen, but there are a lot of wrong ones. And part of what you're saying there is that you're developing the ability to recognize the things that just are not heathen, that are alien to a developed heathen mindset.
Yeah,
we've talked about this before with baggage interpersonally, but when you start to really develop the tools to think like a heathen, then you begin to be able to unpack that baggage, and it does begin to play less of a role in your life, and you stop thinking like a Christian, and I've had to inform people of this, if you grew up in America, your default mode is thinking like a Christian.
Absolutely.
That's just the way it is.
If you grew up in pretty much most of the Western world.
Right. Well, and one of the things, in talking about baggage, I think we probably need to get a little more specific. We were talking about the 9 noble virtues earlier, and this sort of goes into part of that baggage of looking for a defined moral code rather than one that is fundamentally based on what is useful at the moment. It's very utilitarian. But beyond that, we were joking earlier about quoting Havamal because so many people, particularly Americans, but not just, look at the Poetic Edda in particular and the Havamal above all else as Holy Writ. And this is one of those things that we really, really need to teach people. It's like, okay, yes, I understand you like this poem. There's some good things in it. I mean, there's a reason we're fond of it, but it is not sacred scripture. Don't quote it at me. Don't live your life by it. Because for crying out loud, you're reading an English translation based on 13th century poetry that is in no way, shape, or form an accurate rendition of 9th century or earlier moral belief.
Careful now, we're not ready to segue into our last segment.
Oh.
Well, and so I've touched on this on the subreddit, I've touched on it on Facebook groups. Poems like the Havamal, and there's the little byline as words, the high one, I think is what it is. They mean absolutely nothing unless you understand the culture that they come from.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you get people who come in and they quote, rise early and carry a spear. That's a paraphrase, obviously. But
Now, in my defense, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning Eastern time to go to work, and yeah, I do carry because, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and Atlanta traffic is dangerous. It's Mad Max out there, okay?
Well, that's because you live in Atlanta, and we all know that the South is just horrible.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Having been to Atlanta many times, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Whereas Cascadian traffic, isn't the greatest in the world, but when it comes down to you just kind of sit back and chill.
Okay,
The weather's nice.
I'm going to diverge here momentarily for those with a esoteric and occult background. If you've never looked at a map, Atlanta has what we call the perimeter. It's I-285, and it runs completely around the city. How in the hell did they expect traffic in this city to work when you have enclosed it in a circle? You keep all the evil in. Please don't build that belt line. Don't build that other circle around it. It's just gonna get worse. Sorry, it's just a moment.
It's okay. So, to get us back on our topic of, the baggage that we all bring, because it's going to happen, is wanted to bring up a point that Lettuce made, usurp Lettuce for you Reddit users, that Lettuce made in the IRC, which is that one of the first steps on the road to getting rid of your baggage is to get over your Christo-hate.
Yes.
Yes, and actually, this is one of the things that I was talking about with a Wiccan friend of mine the other day. So I'm actually kind of glad it came up. One of the things that I have seen over and over and over again, both in the heathen communities and the neo-pagan communities, is that when they stop believing in Christianity, and to abuse a metaphor here, they don't turn the page and start writing a new chapter in their life. They begin writing in the margins of those pages. And the longer you're there in that chapter of your life, the less room you have to keep writing the story. There comes a point you have to turn the page, get beyond, I grew up with a Baptist background, I grew up with a Methodist background, and they did me wrong, and I'm still angry. No, there's a certain point you just have to get over it. You have to let it go.
And one of the things that and some of the guys, my grandmother passed away last week, and so I attended her funeral earlier this week, and I grew up in a very, very, evangelical family. We are a whole bunch of preachers.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, Assembly of God and Baptist. So. So,
bless your heart.
The difference between, my brother and I are really the only non-Christians in our family. So the difference between how I took my grandmother's funeral, where I was able to walk away from it and feel very happy, and had it very interesting how my cousin who delivered the eulogy brought up, how our ancestors live on through their legacies and all these greatly heathen points. And, I got up and sang, and I sang a Christian hymn, but I knew that that was one my grandmother loved. Versus my brother, who just came away angry because he felt like it was all pointed at him for being an atheist.
That's another point of the baggage. It's not about you.
No.
That's one of those things that this is actually kind of a twofold thing on baggage and things that we have to learn to get past. One of the things that I see regularly mentioned, and I'm glad it does, but not in necessarily in the depth that I think it ought to be mentioned, especially on the sub, is that the gods are not the primary focus of the practice. This doesn't mean they're not important. They are. But if you are coming from a Judeo-Christian background, you're going to focus on the highest level of divinity. You have to learn to understand that our lives, like our theology, is somewhat segmented. If you are talking about what is happening in your life, your everyday life, the only people who are really going to care are going to be your family. That's who you turn to first. This doesn't mean that from time to time, as individuals, rare as this is, the gods will not take interest. But their primary concern is the tribe.
And you raised some really good points there, Kevin. I'd say the most common newbie question we get on the sub comes down to, "Hi, I just got into this. I've been doing it for about 3 days, and I want to make an altar to Odin and do a blowout to Freya. And what can you guys tell me about that?"
Don't do it.
Pretty much, exactly, is usually the answer. Nobody ever wants to hear that.
And I just want to say, for the record, for the longest time, I considered myself this little devotee of Frey, and that was just how I rolled, because that's the only way I knew to understand, because I came into heathenry, before we had a lot of these great sources available. But I get it, and part of it is I spent the first 18 years of my life having you must have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ beat into my head.
Yes.
Right.
And so you feel wrong. It almost feels wrong. You're having this moment of, what do I do now?
Right, and that's why it's not an unforgivable bit of Christian baggage to bring with you. In fact, it's probably the most eminently forgivable bit of baggage you can bring with you is when you come into any new religion. And this goes, I think, beyond Christian baggage. This goes into just understanding of religion baggage. The average religion out there that you're going to find is going to focus on a god or gods. And it's really when you get into religions like ours, not necessarily primarily ours, but religions like ours, that you find out that the gods are more of almost a background. It's not that they're not important; they're immensely important, but they're less common in our praxis.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things that I think it needs to kind of be understood to kind of model it in political terms. Either the housewives or your ancestors, these are going to be the local powers. Whether we're talking about a councilman, an alderman, maybe even the mayor of your little village. You take that and you compare it to the gods themselves, and for Americans, these are your senators. These are not even your congressmen, your senators, because they have such a high level of power. For in some places, I think that they might be representative of like members of parliament for those wonderful countries that like to really see their politics bicker.
Those freedom-hating hippies.
Yes, please have oil. Give us a reason.
Those people that failed to celebrate the 4th of July, the day that America invented freedom.
Exactly. No, but it's one of those things that if you've ever had to deal with a high-level politician, as an individual, sometimes they will do things for you. But by and large, a letter you write to your senator or to a congressman is going to be answered not at all. It's
or
just
by an
not.
aide.
Yeah. I mean, if you get an answer, it's going to be by an aide. But let's not try and parse that theologically for the moment. But if you were to go to a town council meeting, they're sitting right there in front of you. They have to at least talk to you. And this is this is where the smaller local gods get involved, and this is why certain things are their domain and certain things belong on Capitol Hill.
Well, and if I can jump on your analogy here for a second, it's kind of one of those situations where if all of a sudden your congressman or your senator gets 1,000 letters about a topic, they pay attention, just like when it's an issue with the community, with the tribe, that's more in the god's purview.
Right. I mean,
Right.
and I mean, even to some degree, I mean, you have to kind of look at it as what kind of relationship has the tribe built? Because the reality is, most of the gods are probably not even going to acknowledge your tribe. This is why we see some of these ancient dynasties, being quote unquote descendant from Odin or descendant from Frey, or so on, with these sacral kings. And to some degree, I'm even kind of looking at the Anglo-Saxons here with Saxno being a really good example. These relationships aren't necessarily with the Aesir and the Vanir. They are built over generations by the tribe and with their representatives building the tribe's might, building the tribe's main, building their luck, and binding it through reciprocity with a holy power who gives a damn. And not all of them are going to. And that's one of those things to remember. They're not all your best buds. Our gods are not omnipotent. They are not omnibenevolent. They are capable of doing things incorrectly, and they are capable of being extraordinarily petty. And this is something that is really, really hard to learn if you're coming from a Protestant evangelical background, like so many of our noobs really do.
Right.
Well,
and sorry, go ahead.
Well, we have again, on the Christian baggage topic, we're talking about a religion where, there's a very specific verse where they say, does not the Lord care for and feed the sparrows? Would he not do the same for you? We don't have that. We're very much, our gods do what they do because the world is bigger than we are.
Right. Well, I mean, and the cosmic orders, our gods do not exist outside of certain cosmic laws. I hate to put it that way, but I don't have any other terminology available. Weird itself is not something they can escape. It's such an unapproachable thing that, as powerful as they are, that is something even they cannot disabuse themselves of. Are they more likely to be able to manipulate things? Of course. Can they escape it? No. And I think this is one of those things that becomes an essential lesson for newcomers, is that it doesn't matter how powerful you are, you cannot escape the consequences of your actions.
Well, there was a point, I think it was you, Kevin, you made it about heroes. Heroes are people who defeat fate until they don't.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of one of those things that if you look at one of my particular favorites, I love Beowulf. I really do. It's a fantastic read. It is full of just over-the-top heroic activity. Beowulf defeats Grendel, after Grendel has tormented the Danes, Grendel's mother, who is even more powerful, doesn't particularly like that this mortal man has ripped off her son's arms and beaten him about the head and shoulders with them, and she loses. Beowulf goes back to his people. He reigns as king for a long and prosperous time. And then the dragon shows up. And here's a guy who really had not been tested since he returned home. I think there's some references here and there for some basic human victories, but he allies himself with ordinary men. And you have to understand, ordinary men, not heroes. The dragon shows up, and it's like all but one of his thanes stands with him. Beowulf wins at the cost of his own life. But what he won was not the victory over the dragon. He won the perpetuation and the safety of his people, even if his thanes were a bunch of cowardly, useless slackers.
Right. And the beautiful thing about that poem is that, I know I call it a poem, and I guess it is, but holy epic Batman, is that it is something that is important for people to read. It's you understand so much through reading it, but you misunderstand so much while reading it too. And I don't think that anybody here, whether listening or hosting at this point, can say that when the first time they read Beowulf, that they didn't go back later and realize there were some things they absolutely completely missed their first time through.
Not even just completely missed. My first exposure to Beowulf was a British literature class in high school.
Mine too, actually.
And
Mine too.
The interpretation of this content we were given, I got into an argument with my teacher because some of the things that were on the curriculum that she was told to teach about Beowulf was factually incorrect. But how are you going to understand why it's incorrect if you've never bothered to look beyond your own suppositions, your own native conclusions, that baggage we all bring to it? Of course we're going to miss it.
Right, and the reason I bring up the things you miss in Beowulf is, let me pose a question to the three of you. When you were in high school and or college, I missed exactly when you guys said you studied that. Studied that poem. When you were in the very beginning of the poem and you ran across Beowulf's interaction with Unferth, what did you think of Unferth? Don't tell me what you think of him now. Tell me what you thought of him then.
Oh, he was a dick. he was the. In fact, I even specifically remember being told that Unferth is one of the worst characters because of his behavior. He represented this inhospitable behavior that was just unacceptable.
Right. And now, for the sake of those listening at home, what would you say if I told you that Unferth is probably one of the only people in that poem that is completely 100% acting exactly as he should have been?
Oh yeah, I mean, come on.
Totally.
I mean, you have Beowulf, who's basically a kid. Not a child, but he's barely. He does not have Thorin's majestic beard. Let's just say that. And he shows up. It's like, I am Beowulf. I have heard you have a problem with a troll. I shall save you. And Unferth goes, take a look at this braggart. You know, I mean, this guy's running his mouth when the best of our men have failed. And we've got this kid who shows up who none of us know? Yeah, I'm not buying this. Come
Exactly.
on, kid, prove it.
And I would say there are two reasons he does that. The first reason he does that is because who the hell is Beowulf? I mean, they've heard some stories about him, but how much can you trust in stories you've heard that have come across the ocean, come across multiple borders before they got to you and told you, you know, we've all played telephone, and I think our ancestors would have understood that more than we do about the unreliability of messages coming from afar. So, you know, first of all, they have to question that. You know, when this guy comes in and he's saying that he did all these things, you know, I did this and I did that, and these are amazing things, and none of you can do them because I'm awesome and amazing and super humble. They're not necessarily right because we're so humble. They're naturally not going to believe him. But the other reason he does that is because he is both challenging what their folk have been able to do, and at the same time he is saying that he can do something for their folk. And this goes into the question of what dangers he's going to represent to our tribe by taking the actions that he takes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up because that's exactly what I was thinking. We are talking about the people of Herat having suffered unimaginable misery. And they've basically learned how not to aggravate Grendel. And here's this upstart who says, I'll protect you, I'll save you. And that means going against those things that you know are keeping you alive right now. Beowulf represents an inherent risk of complete and utter destruction. If this kid is allowed to run his mouth and make noise and he can't back it up, they're all dead.
Right, and sorry, continue.
This is where Unferth, as the king's man, has to stand up and say, "You're going to get us killed. If you have got to back this up. You have got to convince us we're not going to be exterminated because you are running your mouth."
So the reason I brought this up is because when people ever, I would guarantee you, not just the four of us, but everybody listening to, when you first read Beowulf, or you first hear Beowulf recited, your first reaction, as we all agreed, is that, wow, Unferth's a dick. Beowulf's coming in here and he's saying all these amazing things that he's done, and you know he's promising to help liberate us from Grendel and from all these troubles we're having, and then Unferth just steps up and says, "Well, wait a minute, I think you're a lying asshole." But in reality, what he was doing was a service to his people. But why didn't any of us recognize that? The reason we didn't recognize that is because we don't have a concept of that in our modern culture. And that brings me to the segue that I've been trying to make.
Segue.
We need a button to press for that.
We are not doing segs and bumps in this show. I did that professionally for way too many years.
I don't care if you do or don't. Just please don't put it on two wheels.
So anyways, that brings me into the segue I'm trying to make as to how to understand the concepts, the mindset. We keep talking about a heathen mindset, a heathen way of thinking, but we have never really gone into exactly what the hell that is. And one of those things we're missing is, the reason I chose this for a good way to segue, is we don't understand what it was that Unferth was doing, because we don't understand how the heathens of his day thought. And we're trying our damnedest, and that's the whole point of a heathen mindset, and that often is what brings up some of the difficulties in our conversations with new heathens, is that we have all gone through 2, 5, 10, 20 years of trying to figure out how to think like a heathen, and then people that are still thinking in the way of the overculture come in and they ask us questions that clash with our very way of thinking. And often enough, we recognize it. And we try to encourage people that, this is step one, is to start the multi-year process of learning to think like a heathen. But often enough, we miss it. And that is, a detriment to ourselves and to the newbies coming in. But I bring that up because I think more than anything is that some of these new folk need to try to, or they want to try to understand how exactly does one think like a heathen.
Well, kind of on that, I do think we got some questions that were submitted that I think might give us a way to kind of illustrate specifically in small examples rather than trying to peg down this.
We could spend like
Forming.
several episodes.
Right. I mean,
absolutely, we could.
Forming thing that every time you try to put a pin in it, it just morphs and it slides away. I mean,
it's like nailing Jell-O to a tree.
Exactly. Which, hey, you know what? I just call that midsummer. All right.
Hey, you know what? You're free to do it wrong that far south.
You know what? You're just jealous of my tree. All right.
Well, your tree is covered in Jell-O, so I should be jealous.
I was going to say we have trees that are as tall as the mountains you get out there, so maybe you should back up.
Yeah, but you know what? My trees all come with "Bless Your Heart" written on them.
Yeah, I will verify and testify.
Whereas our trees all come with heathens that will cut you for carving something into them.
Thorin, your trees come
That's true.
with your trees come with arboreal cephalopods. All right.
Hey, you know what? The Pacific Northwest tree squid is nothing to laugh at.
So guys.
Okay, so there is a question, real quick. This question came up. It was submitted before the show even started. I really want to get to it just so that Svythrone won't, pop a blood vessel in his head. Do heathens have a moral obligation to, at the very least, maintain natural habitats, or at least actively protect the environment?
Ooh, okay. You know what?
That gets into mindset, because how do we view the wild world?
Right. You know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say no, but if we're going to take a look at the ancient heathen mindset, I want to bring up a joke, and I'm actually not trying to pick on the Icelanders here, but there's an old joke that says, "What do you do if you get lost in an Icelandic forest? Stand up."
Yeah.
No. And I want to be very clear here, is because they have gone about trying to reforest their island. I find this absolutely commendable, but most of the growth is very, very short because the island was deforested. Our heathen ancestors did not have a concept of conservation or environmentalism like we would today. They could not envision a world without trees everywhere. So to take them as an example and try to move it forward, inherently, do we have a moral obligation? No. Should we have the sense of self-preservation to try and not ruin our world for future generations, for our children, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren times 50? Of course. What is good for the tribe is good. And let's be honest, if we do not have clean water, clean skies, we're going to die. Period.
And
That is not good.
That's why I would say that, yes, we have a moral obligation, because my highest moral obligation is that which is good for the tribe. And that which is good for the tribe is this environmental preservation.
Right. Well, see, and I kind of want to parse this again, in that, in terms of baggage, we cannot afford to think of everything in terms of morality. Sometimes morality simply does not apply. Common sense, however, does.
Yeah, but common sense isn't common.
Well,
I
no,
think
but
we need
that's
to
one of the
step
things we
back
have to
here
work
just
on.
a second, because morality is a tricky term when it comes to heathenry. And the simple fact of the matter is, for a heathen, like you said, that which is good for the tribe is good. And that means that we define morality and ethics just a little bit different than the rest of the world. And so, morally, if I'm expected to benefit my tribe, if benefiting my tribe is a moral obligation, then morally, yes, I have to preserve the natural world around me, because without it, there is no strength for my tribe to build on. And I think that becomes a tricky thing with heathenry, is we have to start redefining the way we look at morality.
Well, I think that a lot of this plays into a concept that I've spoken of a few times, primarily on the sub, and I often hit on secondary and tertiary points, is that we constantly talk about the concept of thinking like a heathen and understanding the way our ancestors thought about things so that we can think like a heathen. And think like a heathen, we always beat that around. But what exactly is that in a modern day setting? Because the last thing we need to be are a bunch of reenactors. We're not trying to reproduce what it was that our ancestors were doing. But what we want to do is take the way our ancestors thought and try to apply that to a modern day with all the things that go along with it. So I mention that because you have to think about things like the preservation we mentioned. Our ancestors never would have thought about a world without trees until, well, they ran into Iceland and ripped all the trees away. And this is just one of the many things they never would have gotten around to thinking about. But what we can do is apply their thought processes to it and see how it plays out in the modern day. This is very difficult. It's something I often refer to as synthesis. The synthesis of ancient thought patterns to modern situations. And I bring this up in this episode because you're going to run into this concept throughout your heathen life. And if you don't run into it, then you're probably doing it wrong. Because there are a lot of things that we deal with today that our ancestors never dealt with. How does one deal with, for example, to pimp a future episode, transsexuality as it applies to heathenism? How does one deal with homosexuality as it applies to heathenism? We would see, if you look back, a push on the concept of family and bearing children, but is that an end into and of itself, or is that something that was important in its day and is not necessarily as important now? And it's really important for us to understand that we can't just do what our ancestors did exactly. We have to think like them and then decide how they would get to the right place based on modern concepts.
So before we wrap this up, because we're almost hitting time, I want to get to this other question that was asked by Heretic Hierophant, because I think it really will kind of sum up the whole podcast here. How can new people work to incorporate heathen beliefs, ethics, and morals into their everyday? And if we can give some short answers, that would be awesome.
Well, okay,
Being utilitarian.
Since we're doing this, why don't we go ahead and go in order? We'll let Kevin, and then Lauren, and then Thorin, and then I'll finish up.
Be utilitarian. We run into enough I cannot speak now. We run into enough times where being utilitarian means being selfish. That's not what I mean. But be utilitarian means take each situation, evaluate it as it is, and address it as for what will be beneficial to your folk.
I'm going to say that you live by the philosophy of right action. What you do is more important than how you think. So challenge yourself to try to do the next right thing. whether that is doing the dishes or, whatever it is. Try to engage in right actions that are congruent with that heathen worldview. And that, to me, is that's how you do it.
Absolutely.
I think when it comes down to it, when you're trying to boil down the morals and ethics, you can always look to a common denominator. What is it that was driving the various different points of view? So if you look back into ancient times and you see that this thing or this thing or this thing was considered moral or it was considered immoral, try to find that common basis deeper down than that caused it to be considered moral or immoral, and then relate it back to modern day and ask yourself, is that still applicable? I brought up the examples earlier of homosexuality or transsexualism, both of which might not necessarily have been considered moral in their day, though, yes, let's not get into the history of it. There's a lot of debate there. Let's just go with this. Might not have been considered moral in their day. However, a lot of that boiled down to your responsibility to the tribe to create the next generation. That's not necessarily as big of an issue today because we don't exactly have a problem with underpopulation on this planet. So in that case, where once upon a time our ancestors might have seen homosexuality or transsexualism as immoral, today they're not going to give any fucks about it because, simply speaking, it's not a problem anymore. And I think that's the heart of what I'm getting at with the entire synthesis concept, is to find out exactly what it is that caused something to be viewed the way it was and decide whether or not that view is still applicable today.
So, for me, I think to get to the heart of the question here, we're asking about how you incorporate heathenry into your day-to-day life. In reality, it's about being completely true to your people. You don't let your people down in any way that you can avoid, and so there's going to be aspects of it that are extremely uncomfortable for a lot of people, in that, yes, you do need to stand up for your family regardless of whether they're right or not. They're your people. You need to protect that. And whether that's your kin or your tribe, your kindred, what have you, if you are holding frith with these people, then that is what it is to be a heathen, is you are diving into that commitment to be true to them no matter what.
That very deep well of inescapable bondage.
Exactly. It's not a bond, and we've seen it on the threads before where people are like, well, my family's a bunch of shitheads. Yeah, we all have people like that in our families, and they're family. So if you're going to live as a heathen, you have to have their back. That's the way.
And it's one of those things that where you have your family, that they do disappoint. And let's be honest, we're talking about the ideal, not the everyday situation that we find ourselves then or now. But you back them up, and even if they are worthless individuals, teach them a better way. Set the example. Drag the next generation forward to a better way just by simply showing them a better way.
And I think that's the heart of, in reality, we joke around about heathenry being the religion of homework, etc., but the heart of heathenry is community, period. And that is the biggest hurdle, especially for modern Americans. I'm not entirely sure how it works in Europe. I don't know the culture there, but the heart of heathenry goes against this ideal of, well, if your family is hurting you, just abandon them, which is a very American thing. And so, to be perfectly frank, you have to set that aside in order to start incorporating heathen ideals and ethics into your life. You just do.
And I think with that, oh, sorry, Lauren, I was going to say, I think with that we could eventually devote damn near an entire episode, if not, several weeks worth, to exploring topics like frith, grith, luck, worth, etc., in a heathen context.
And we will.
Absolutely, we have all the time in the world.
Well, I just wanted to say this.
We have 90 minutes a week.
I have kind of a family background where there are issues and there are things, and I won't go into detail, but heathenry has made it easier for me to get past that, to get past a lot of anger I had at my parents over things that I had a right to be angry about, but they're still family.
Well, and even if you're angry, find a better use for that anger.
Right.
Don't understand that, yes, you have a right to be angry, but that doesn't give you a right to destroy kinship. Do something better. Right action always must come first.
Absolutely.
And that touches on so many other subjects. I mean, at this point where we are in this conversation, we could go for another 2 hours and not even scratch the surface of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So instead, I'm going to talk about what we're doing next week. Next week, Focus will be talking about ancestors, and that's going to be a really exciting. We're going to talk about ancestor veneration and what does that mean? What does it mean when people bring up their DCer? Or, what is that? So that's where we're going to be next week. I also want to remind folks we are now on iTunes and we are on Stitcher, so there's really no excuse for you not to listen to us every week. You have no excuses.
Absolutely, and we all just have such beautiful voices and such important things to say that you obviously should be downloading these podcasts and disseminating them to everybody you know.
Because this is how you're going to learn to do it right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Or at least less wrong.
Less wrong. And don't forget, if you are listening, you can come check us out. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/heathen talk. We're at heathen_talk on Twitter. Reddit, of course, reddit.com. We're in the community over there. Also true, because that's been there for a long time. And, come by, tell us how we're doing this wrong. Who knows, you may inspire a blog post from us. You just never know.
I'll say, the Asatru sub has been there for almost 5 years, and that's like forever in internet time.
See, I actually consider myself a Asatru. So, but heathen, is the more general term now.
That's okay, Lauren. Not everybody can do it, right?
You're not the boss of me.
So I do want to point out that, again, we are on Stitcher, which is very exciting. You can get hold of us at our Gmail, heathen.talk.podcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. We are out there. We want to hear from you. And most importantly, we have had some submissions for music. And we've had 2 submissions total. I have to share the second one with the group. I've been slacking on that for the banner image. And we want your projects. We want to showcase what you can do.
And we're going to, if we get enough music in that we can do different heathen musicians every week, that would be amazing. I would be super pumped about that.
Absolutely. And, if I can bring up that, we are looking ahead in the future to more than just 1 week at a time. We just go ahead and assume that we're going to be here for years to come. As Lauren mentioned, next week we're going to be doing topics on ancestors and ancestor veneration, what that means in heathenry. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be doing an episode that is going to be of particular interest to at least a few heathens, and the rest of you are probably going to want to pop some popcorn to see what comes out of it when we do an episode on homosexuality, transsexuality, LGBT+ in general in heathenry, with guest hosts. It's actually agreed to come on Lauren Popkin of Seattle's Gender Justice League.
It's Jennifer Popkin, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm Lauren. She's Jennifer.
Did I say Lauren Popkin?
You did.
I'm sorry, I've been drinking multiple types of alcohol since the beginning of this podcast. If you had my job, you would be too. So yes, Jennifer Popkin, thank you very much for the correction of the Gender Justice League here in Seattle. And beyond that, suggestions from you guys for what future topics should be about would be a fantastic thing.
And on that note, just remember, you're doing it wrong.
And you're not the boss of me.
Y'all have a good week.
Good night.
Good night.